You probably remember back in 2019 when the US floated the idea of buying Greenland. The whole world just sort of laughed. It sounded completely absurd. But what if it wasn't a joke at all? What if it was just the latest move in an obsession that's been going on for over a century? Well, today, we're going to dig into why America has this strange and very persistent fixation on this massive frozen island.
And Denmark's reaction? Oh, it was swift and it was clear. The media treated it like some kind of bizarre fever dream. Late-night hosts had an absolute field day, and social media, of course, turned it into a meme. The consensus was pretty simple. This was a weird, kind of comical real estate fantasy.
But here's the twist. Inside the Pentagon and in Washington strategic circles, nobody was laughing, not one bit. Because for them, this conversation wasn't new. It was old, unfinished business. And that gets us to the real question. If this is so absurd, why does this idea keep coming back again and again?
So to really get this, we got to rewind the clock, back to a time when nations actually bought and sold huge chunks of territory like pieces on a chessboard. See, this isn't some new bizarre idea from out of nowhere. It's a strategic ambition that's been simmering for over 100 years. This pattern of interest goes way, way back. It all kicked off in 1867, right after the U.S. bought Alaska. The guy behind that deal, Secretary of State Seward, immediately saw Greenland as the next key piece for dominating the Arctic. Then, in 1917, the U.S. actually did buy territory from Denmark, the Danish West Indies, which you and I know as the U.S. Virgin Islands. Fast forward to 1946, President Truman makes a dead serious offer, $100 million in solid gold. He knew the Arctic was going to be the next big flashpoint. So you see those 2019 headlines? They weren't an anomaly at all. They were just the latest chapter in a very long book.
So, okay, why the obsession? Well, it all starts with pure, cold, hard geography. In military strategy, Greenland isn't just some big island. It's what they call an unsinkable aircraft carrier, and it's perfectly positioned between the world's great powers. Now, here's a concept most people have never heard of, but it's absolutely crucial: the GIUK gap. This is one of the most important naval choke points on the entire planet. Think about it. For a Russian nuclear submarine to get from its Arctic bases out into the open Atlantic, it has to pass through this gap. For NATO, this corridor is basically a monitored kill zone, and Greenland forms the western wall of that gate. If you control Greenland, you control who gets in and who gets out. Period.
And think about what this means in military terms, right? Distance equals reaction time. A missile flying from Moscow to Washington, D.C. has to travel about 5,000 miles. But one launched from Greenland, it's less than half that distance to get to Moscow. That just dramatically slashes the warning time. Owning the territory means you permanently control that strategic high ground. And here's the thing, the U.S. already has a massive foothold there. Pacific Space Base is the northernmost U.S. military installation on the planet. Its crazy powerful radars are scanning 24/7 for any missile launches coming over the North Pole. Since the Cold War, the military has called this base indispensable. The logic is pretty simple. If you can't buy the house, you rent a room. But ownership is permanent. It gets rid of any diplomatic headaches or uncertainty about having access to one of the most sensitive radar sites on Earth. But listen, this isn't just about military games. As all that ice melts, it's revealing what's underneath. And what's underneath is basically a treasure chest filled with resources that are critical for the 21st century economy.
This chart, wow, it tells a story all on its own. A story of incredible strategic dominance. China controls something like 90% of the world's ability to process rare earth elements. And we're not talking about some obscure metals here. These are in everything from your smartphone to an F-35 fighter jet. For Washington, being this dependent on a rival is, well, it's a strategic nightmare.
And this is where Greenland becomes a potential game changer. It's sitting on one of the world's largest undeveloped deposits of these exact elements. For the West, this is one of the only realistic ways to break its supply chain dependency on China. So this isn't just about buying land. It's about buying control over the raw materials of the next 100 years.
The numbers are just staggering. When you add up the rare earths, the uranium, the oil, the gas, some estimates put the value of Greenland's untapped resources in the trillion-dollar range. Suddenly, an offer of a few $100 billion doesn't sound so absurd, does it? It starts to look more like a long-term strategic investment.
But this isn't just a simple real estate deal between governments, because Greenland isn't empty. And this is where the story stops being a geopolitical thriller and becomes much, much more complicated.
Only about 56,000 people live in Greenland. That's less than the crowd you'd find at a typical NFL game.
But for them, this isn't about strategy or resources. It's about home. They have their own language, their own culture, and a history that is deeply, deeply connected to that land. You can't just buy a society, especially not one with its own dreams and aspirations.
And right here is what you could call the independence trap. See, a huge majority of Greenlanders want full independence from Denmark. The problem, Denmark gives them an annual grant of about $600 million, which makes up more than half of Greenland's entire public budget. Without it, the economy would just collapse. This creates a vacuum. If Greenland ever does become independent, whoever steps in to replace that funding basically becomes the country's new most important partner. And you can bet the US and China are both keenly aware of this.
And you have to understand, there are deep wounds here. Back in the 1950s, the Danish government removed 22 Inuit children from their families in a social engineering experiment. It left this legacy of deep, deep distrust toward any foreign power that comes in promising to help. So when politicians talk about buying Greenland, they're talking about a population that is resilient, that is hurting, and that is deeply sensitive to being treated like a commodity.
So let's pull the lens back for a second. This whole thing isn't just about the US and Greenland. It's about a new great power competition that is heating up at the top of the world. And it's all being driven by one massive accelerating force: climate change.
It's really just a simple chain reaction. As the Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up. These routes can literally cut weeks off the travel time between Asia and Europe, saving billions in fuel. Russia is already building new military bases and icebreakers to control its massive coastline. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is planning a polar Silk Road. And Greenland sits right at the gateway of these new global trade highways. Whoever influences Greenland influences the logistical toll booths of the future.
All of this leads to one final, crucial question. In this new Arctic competition, with all these powerful players and competing interests, what is the ultimate goal? What's the end game here?
Let's just break it down. To the United States, Greenland is a shield, a forward defense post. To China, it's a battery, a source for critical minerals and access to new trade routes. To Denmark, it's a responsibility, a part of its kingdom with a very delicate future. And to the Greenlanders, they just see a home. Everyone sees what they want to see. But the ice doesn't care about politics. It's just melting. And as it disappears, it's revealing what might just be the most valuable and the most dangerous piece of real estate on the 21st century map.